Well, I mean, that's the sort of the perfect segue to start talking a little bit about Sing You Home, which of course, tonight has been about already. But this is your latest novel. It debuted at #1 in February of this year. And it's part of this evening, which is about gay identity and rights and family and music. Can you just give us a very brief, in your own words, summary of the plot?
Sure. So Sing You Home is the story of Zoe and Max Baxter. They've been married for 10 years, and they have been trying really hard to have a baby for 10 years. And they've been going through all sorts of fertility treatments. And after multiple failed attempts and several miscarriages, Zoe finds herself pregnant, and she loses the baby in the 8th month. And that pretty much is the final straw, and it breaks the marriage apart. And Max and Zoe deal with their grief in very different ways. Max winds up becoming an alcoholic and finding redemption in his brother's very right-wing evangelical church. Zoe, in the meantime, throws herself into her work. She is a music therapist, which means that she uses music in a clinical setting to affect some kind of emotional, social, or physiological change in a client or a patient. And she's called in by a woman named Vanessa, who's a school counselor, to work with a 16-year-old girl in a high school who's suicidal. And while she's working with this girl, she and Vanessa get to be friends. And eventually, Zoe realizes that she kind of wants to be more than friends, that for the first time in her life, she's fallen in love with another woman. And they wind up getting married and deciding that they want to start a family. And Zoe remembers that there are still 3 frozen embryos left over from when she and Max were trying. So she goes to her ex-husband and says, "Can my partner and I use the embryos?" And he says, "Over my dead body." And the rest of the book is about sort of the legal battle that has to be faced between this very right-wing church and Zoe and Vanessa as they try to start a family.
So, I mean, you look at a lot of really intense issues, in this book. You look at IVF, you look at reproduction rights, you look at what makes a family. I mean, what inspired you to get to this point to write this novel?
I've wanted to write about gay rights for so long. To me, it's one of the last civil rights that we haven't granted in this country. If you travel as much as I have, you realize it's really embarrassing, actually. A lot of people overseas don't understand why it's even an issue here. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind that I really wanted to tackle this. And I had started doing the research for the book when something changed it very dramatically for me. My oldest son, who is now 20, was applying to colleges at the time that I was working on it. And he came up to me one day, and he had written his application essay, and he asked me if I would take a look at it. And I said, "Yeah, sure, bring it to me, Kyle." So I start reading it, and in his essay, Kyle came out to myself and my husband, and, well, everyone that he was applying to as well. And he said he wanted to talk about it, and I said, "Did you want to talk about the grammar or the content?" And he said both. And I gave him a big hug, and I said, "Kyle, I'm so happy for you. We're so proud of you." He had a terrific reaction from my husband and myself because Kyle, I couldn't love him anymore if he wasn't gay, and I don't love him any less because he is gay. And like John said, I could have told you he was gay when he was 3 years old, but it was his decision to be able to tell us when he wanted to tell us. And he's an amazing kid. He goes to a rival university in New Haven, and he actually is an Egyptology major there. He runs the Yale Children's Theater, which performs fairy tales basically for underprivileged kids in New Haven. He is one of the captains of the newbies on the ballroom dance team at Yale. Really, the least interesting thing about Kyle is his sexual orientation. And, if anything, having Kyle come out in that essay made me so aware that I was writing the right book because it became a very personal battle for me. When Kyle is old enough to want to have kids and to start a family, I don't want him to have to jump through hoops in order to do it.
Absolutely. And, I mean, you write this character, Wade Preston, who is a lawyer who defends the rights of the preborn, which in the case of the novel is embryos. And he has this line, you have him saying this line, where he says, "Attention is what I do best." And I guess I just want to know, what does it mean to have a character like him saying a line like that? And does it reflect at all on, your views of the legislation around reproduction rights, the Personhood Amendment, anything like that in our country?
Well, what you have to be aware of is that the legislation around personhood rights, it's the Wild West of law right now. There is no legislation. And that's really the problem for even a politician who's a liberal politician who deflects gay rights and says, oh, let's leave it up to the states. That's a real problem because it's different from state to state, and we have 50 of them in this country. And the borders are pretty close. So what is true in Massachusetts about embryos is not true in New York. And tomorrow it could change in the next legislation. It literally, if you follow the trajectory of lawsuits about what constitutes a person or who gets to decide who's a fit parent, it flip-flops constantly based on whatever judge is ruling. That's not really a safe place for lawmaking right now. So Wade Preston is an interesting mix because Wade is not only illustrating, I think, that incredible tangle of law right now that is reproductive rights. But what he also is a very strong model of some of the people I encountered when I was doing research for the book with the Christian right. I have to say, I've been doing this for a very long time. It truly was the hardest research I've ever done in my life. And I think it's because I kept losing my author hat and my mom hat kept slipping on, and there were times I actually had to walk away and leave the setting because the things they were saying were driving me crazy. But Focus on the Family was the group that I worked with, and I spent 6 hours doing an interview with a woman named Melissa Fryrear, who has since left Focus on the Family, but who describes herself as a heterosexual with a homosexual problem. And what she said was that she doesn't like to say she was ex-gay because that implies that she was ever not straight, and she feels that she is straight now. Focus on the Family is sort of an umbrella, under the umbrella of Exodus International. They run these Love One Out conferences where they say you can go if you're not happy being gay, and you can learn how not to be gay. It's important to note that they don't feel that that being gay is strictly non-biological. They do think there's a biological component, but they don't think that's the majority of it. They do think it has to do with a distant father and overbearing mother. They don't say that God hates gay people, but they say God really does make it clear he doesn't want you to be gay. And they also say that although they don't feel that being gay is a choice, it is a choice whether you choose to act on it or not. And so Melissa and I walked through 6 hours of conversation about scientific studies that they feel they can refute that prove a biological basis to being gay, and also a lot of biblical research, which was, really lots of circular logic for me to follow. It was like I needed a roadmap just to see where she was going. And for me, the hardest moment in the entire interview came when when I asked her if she worried that some of the positions that Focus on the Family espoused, I wondered whether that might lead people to commit acts of hate against gay people. And she said, well, thank goodness that's never happened. And today would have been Matthew Shepard's 35th birthday. And I said, have you ever heard of Matthew Shepard? Have you ever heard of, and I named 6 kids who had died recently by suicide because of bullying, because of sexual orientation. And she burst into tears, but she had no answers for me. And the things that Wade says, and the things that Pastor Clive says, and the things that Max says in this book, they are things that came verbatim from that interview. I get a lot of hate mail for this book. I've gotten more hate mail for Sing You Home than I've ever gotten in 18 years. It all comes from people who identify with the Christian right and who call themselves evangelicals and who say, I am giving Christianity a bad name. And I write everyone back, mostly because I'm a moron, and I say, I really appreciate your point of view. Thank you for sharing it with me. However, I don't think I'm giving Christianity a bad name. I think Focus on the Family is doing a pretty good job of that. So don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you do also in the book is you provide, a foil to this character. And you bring her in. Her name is Angela Moretti. She's a lawyer. She works for GLAAD. And, she's there to represent Zoe through all of this. And you make it clear that she's straight, she's married, but her personal and her professional interests really lie with, pursuing equal rights, equal marriage rights for everybody. And that leads me to ask, in your opinion, in your life as a mom even, what are the roles and responsibilities of straight allies?
I don't know that there are rules, and I don't know that there are responsibilities. I think it's up to a certain comfort level. Actually, my husband and I were just talking about this on the drive down, because there are some people who want to be activists and who want to be advocates, but some people are a little more comfortable waving a pride banner than others are, and that's okay. It's not up to my son, because he's gay, to be vocal or to march at the front of the Pride Parade. He might just be himself, and that could be enough in his lifetime if that's what he feels good about. However, this does go back to one of your first questions. I've got that pulpit, so what do I want to say? And I don't know why. I wish I knew the reason why. I don't know why, when it comes to a minority group like gay people, for example, who have sort of been brushed aside or who have had rights denied to them. Sometimes when the discontent comes from within the minority group, people don't want to listen. They say, oh, it's you again. Oh, we've heard this before. Oh, stop your whining. And that's a horrible thing, because they're the ones who are suffering and who are living with those injustices. But for whatever reason, when someone in the majority opens their mouth, people listen. And so if you are in a position and you have a comfort level where you can speak out for someone, why not do it?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think it's interesting to bring up, the majority versus the minority group. You're here with the humanist chaplaincy at Harvard, and you have Zoe and Vanessa in this novel, who are the two protagonists, and they're not just lesbians; they're also atheists. And you have this one scene where Zoe is getting so frustrated, and she's being attacked not just for her sexual orientation, but she's being attacked because she's not Christian. And she has this line, which I told you, I underlined and circled, where she says, "Atheism, I realize, is the new gay."
It is. Yeah.
And I wondered if you could elaborate on that, and if you really think that that's true.
I do think it's true. I actually put that in specifically for my husband, but I think that. We're in the same position. Well, here's the deal. We're not where I would like to be with gay rights. I would like to believe that 20 years from now, we're going to be in a place that no one could have conceived of 20 years ago. And, we won't even need a World AIDS Day. Wouldn't that be great? There are so many great places to go with that particular movement. But by the same token, I think atheism has become where being gay was 20 years ago. It's what you don't admit to people. It's what you stay in the closet about. Because if you tell someone you're an atheist, people just look at you sort of strangely, or they think your horns coming out of your head, or that you're worshiping the devil in your bathroom. I don't know. But there's that sense that there are polls, of course, that have been done saying that the least likely person who is electable in this country is not someone who is of a different race, or someone who is Jewish, or someone who is even Mormon, but an atheist. For some reason, in this particular country, there is a stronghold on church going. And again, this comes down again to traveling outside the country. One of the most interesting things that I heard over and over when I would write about religion, and I was doing a book tour in England or Australia, was, why do Americans go to church? What is up with that? They don't understand why Americans are always going on Sundays. And that's a really interesting thing, because I don't know what it is about this country. I don't know if it's that we want to be seen going to church because we think that's going to help raise our esteem in the eyes of our neighbors. But it's a very strange thing. And so I do think that there is a hesitance to tell people that you don't believe, or that you don't know even, because right now Christianity still has this country in a stranglehold.